Hi, I'm Robert Joseph, and today I'm going to show you how I do an original jean hem. And what that is hemming a pair of jeans or pants that have a unique hem to them, say, for instance, fraying like I have on mine, or any other design detail that you don't want to get rid of when you're hemming the pants. You actually want to keep that. So this is just one of the ways that it can be done, but this is the way that I feel that really works for me, and I thought that I would share that with you. Before we get started, I will mention during the video a couple of things that I want to point out here. You're going to need a big needle. I'm using a size 20 in my industrial machine. For those of you who's using home machines, if you can't find that size, look for an 18 or even a 16 will work depending on the thickness of your fabric. You may also find needles that are specifically made for denim, and they will say that on that needle. I'm also using a thicker thread. I'm using a Tex 60, which is kind of a medium weight thread for denim. If you can't find that text size, a Tex 40 or anything that says denim, made for denim, will work for you. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. And now we'll get right into the tutorial right after the intro. Okay, so let's get into this original jean hem. And before we get into actually marking and cutting the pant off, let's actually look at the original hem. So this is the original hem here on these pants, and there's some fraying around the bottom. And this is the part I'm going to keep. So we're actually just going to cut this off, and we're going to sew it back on at the length that I need. Now, before we get into cutting the pant off, I just want to say that I'm going to be using a denim jean thread, and this is a little bit heavier than regular thread. It's cotton wrapped polyester, and it's about a Tex 60. So if you're into understanding thread widths, this is actually a good width, or even higher. I know that some other companies use 100 or 105 Tex. Now, this is the color that I'm going to be actually sewing the piece back on to the pant with. And then I have two colors that I'm not too sure of which one I'm going to use. So this more wheat color is actually closer to the color that is on the pant. It's a little bit lighter. And then I have this more yellow gold color here, if I can get some off of here. You can kind of see the difference. It's a little bit brighter. So I'm not quite sure what color I'm going to use yet, but again, this is Tex 60, and I'm going to be using a big needle in my machine, and I'm going to be using my industrial machine today. And the needle size I'm using is going to be a size 20. So if you're using a home machine, you're going to need to find a larger needle. You should be able to find, hopefully, maybe an 18, but you're going to at least need a 16, depending on the weight of your pant. So sometimes on the market you can see they will actually be labeled denim. They may not give you a size, it just may be called denim. So you're going to need a big needle for this exercise. The other thing is with my industrial machine, it should go over this thickness pretty easy. If you're using a home machine, you may need something that's called a hump jumper, and it's basically the width of the height of this area that you put behind the presser foot, so the presser foot will be even as it goes over here, over this thick part here. Some of you also may have a foot with a little push button on the back of your foot that actually releases the back of the foot to make it even. So that's what that little button on the back of your foot is for. But I don't have that on my machine, and I don't actually have an even or walking foot on my machine. But since I've used the machine for a long time, I know how it works. And this denim isn't really heavy. It's been washed. It's been softly washed. So it's actually should go over this thickness on the inseam pretty easy. So now I'm going to get these ready to cut. So I'm going to lay these out, and I won't be able to put the entire pant here in the screen. Maybe I will. Well, see, you don't really need to see the top. Anyway, this is actually the inseam mark that I needed, so I'm actually just going to mark this with my chalk. Okay, and this here, if you can see down here, what I've got here is actually the front of the pant here. And what I'm going to do is, I'll make this even in the camera. So this is the mark, and for the original hems, you're actually going to be cutting off at the length that you need. So you need to be pretty sure that that's the length that you want, because you really won't be able to lengthen the pant after you cut it off. So cut at the exact length, and then we're actually going to be sewing this part back on like this. Now some people like to just fold this up and stitch here right next to the hem and then fold it over, but then you have this extra thickness. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to encase the seam allowance into the hem here. So I'm going to make a straight line going straight across, and this is actually how the pant legs themselves are cut when you actually make pants. Instead of going off, folding this over and cutting here with the inseam in the center and going straight across, because what that'll cause is it to be higher or lower in the front. So I like to cut straight across the front of the pant, because that's the way, for those of you who make pants or know anything about manufacturing, this is the way that it's cut off. Now instead of measuring the other leg, I'm going to measure these, put these up here together, flat together, and line them up evenly from the bottom, from here up, and that should be even from the bottom of the hem, and it should come out the same length instead of measuring each of the individual inseams. And if you hem skirts or dresses, you know that you actually measure from the floor of where the person is standing. That's to make sure that you get the even hem all the way around. All right, that looks pretty good. So I'm going to use my scissors here, and I'm going to cut straight across. Now, some of you may be gasping, but I know that's the length that I want. So now that these are cut, we can actually put the pant itself aside for a minute. And then what we're going to do is we're actually going to rip this hem out. Okay? So we're going to actually very carefully rip these threads out and open up this hem. And that's what I'm going to do now. So be careful when you go around where they have gone over it twice. You don't really want to be ripping any extra fraying of your hem area. So just be careful. And I'm ripping out every other stitch here, and I'm going to do the rest of this off camera. Okay, so I've got this one all ripped out and cleaned up, and I'll just turn it inside out so you can see. And see, that's opened up. Now, I'm about to give you a lot of information here that you need to look at. So if we look at the outside of this, aside from the frayed ends here of the hem that I want to keep, there's also this line that's going across here that's kind of a whitish blue color, and that is just above the stitch line. And what that is that's the ridge of the fold over of the hem on the other side from when they did probably like a stone wash on this, and so the indigo dye came off of this part because it was raised and had the thickness. So you need to decide if you want to keep that, and I think I'm going to try to keep that as well on the finished jean hem. So what we have here, this is the original before I ripped it out. So we need to actually measure what that is. And from the stitching to the bottom, it's about a 1/2 inch. And then that white line ridge is about 1/8 of an inch. So normally what I tell people to do is to cut off a 1/4 inch above where the stitching line is. But since this blue here adds a little bit of length, I need to consider that amount as well. And then the middle of that width is really what our seam allowance above this line should be. The reason for that is because we're actually going to be sewing this back onto the pant, and we're going to be subtracting that amount of the seam allowance. And to get the exact length that I need, the seam allowance has to be 1/2 of the amount of the width of the hem. So normally it would be a 1/4 inch, because this is a 1/2 inch to the stitch line. Okay, to the stitch line. But then I'm going to include this white line. So I've got an extra 1/8 of an inch. So I'm going to be going just slightly over a 1/4 of an inch. So from there, here, and I don't usually mark it, so it's about a 1/4 inch plus a 1/16. That's about where that is. So some people would just say a fat 1/4, but that's also a quilting term. So I'm just going to eye this all the way around. I'm personally not too worried about what this looks like as long as it gets close to the finished effect. I actually don't really care about the original hem personally, but I thought that I would do this exercise because I actually have kind of some design detail here, and I can do that as an exercise for you. So now that I've got that marked, then I'm going to go ahead and cut. And normally I actually do this all on the inside, but because it's easier to see on the camera this way, I've got my line here, and I'm just going to fold it here to get it started. Now again, once you cut, there's no going back on this. I'm going to cut this off all the way around. Now the next thing that you're going to have to worry about is whether or not you're going to need to taper. So sometimes if you have a tapered jean, the bottom piece here, the hem piece here, is actually more narrow than the pant leg you're going to be sewing it onto. So what I'm going to do is first, okay, so I've got this all cut with that seam allowance, and we're actually going to be stitching, let me put a pin here. So here is that like whitish line. Let me fold this so you can see it. Here's where the stitching was, that dark line. This white line is the line that has been bleached away. So my stitch line is going to be right about here, just above that line. So, and we'll have to kind of see where that is so we can judge how far away from the stitch line on the inside. And you can see all of this. If you can't see it in the camera, once you actually do this, you'll actually be able to see all the stitch lines. So I'm going to take this pin out, because what I wanted to tell you, the next thing you're going to do is make sure that you're getting the proper pieces matched to each other. So when you cut these, sometimes you might need to mark them left and right, because we have the inseam that has that folded over and then it's top stitched down. So this piece matches with this leg. So I'm going to actually just kind of pin these together, matching that seam. And the way I like to do this is like this. I'm kind of doing it backwards on camera. Let me see if I can fold this the other way. Okay, because we kind of want to peek in here and make sure we're matching those seams, and I'm a little bit off, but we can adjust those. Now, if you're doing this for a customer and it's really real professional work, if you get those seams off, you're going to have to rip it out to make sure that you get those seams lined up, right? Those look pretty close. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the next seam. This seam should be open, so it should be pressed open, And then I'm going to match it to the other side of that. And I'm going to match that seam. It's kind of peek. If you can't peek on the inside there, then peek on the outside. So those seams, move it over just a little bit. And also you can kind of work with this as you're in the machine sewing too. Okay, so those match. Now, you'll need to see if your piece that you're sewing back on is smaller or bigger than the pant. So sometimes if you have a bell, then if you have a, what they call a boot cut, which is actually kind of flared at the bottom, you're actually going to have to taper the hem piece to match the size of the pant piece. Now, if your piece here is smaller than what's going onto the pant, then you're going to have to taper the pant. And you would, if it's not a lot of taper, then just do it on the out seam. But if it's a lot of taper, then you're going to need to rip out this top stitching and actually taper evenly on either side. But these seem to be pretty well matched. Try not to stretch them too much, even if they have spandex in them, because you don't want to cause it to flare out and kind of ripple around. So, but these ones were fairly straight legs, so I think I'm okay. So get this other pin. Usually I don't pin, I just kind of do this with my eye. But I'm going to start here. I'm actually going to start a little bit away from here. So see where that pin is marked? So let's just kind of flip this over. I think I can go up a little bit more from that. I think I've got too much of a 1/4 of an inch going. Maybe they're not lining up exactly. So it is thicker there. I'm not getting this lined up. So sometimes you have to put it over a little bit further, and then the machine will push that top piece into place. That's best. Okay, that looks good. So now I'm actually ready to go over the machine. I'm actually going to turn this inside out. That'll have me sewing here right next to, you can kind of see that stitch line. It's right here. I hope you can see that. I can't tell in the monitor, but it's a darker line. This is the top stitching line, and I need to stitch up about 3/16 from that stitch line. Remember that white line that had been bleached out was 1/8 of an inch on top of that stitch line, and then I want to stitch that 1/16 just above it. So that's what I'm going to be doing. So let's go over to the machine now. Okay, so here I am at the machine, and this here is that thick part. So I'm actually going to start a few stitches before that and kind of come over this thick part. These are the heaviest part of the jean. So I'm going to start, make sure everything is even here. And again, I'm using a size 20 needle. It's a big needle. And my stitch length is a little bit longer than I normally use. So on my industrial machine, I have it set at a 3, but it should be about 10 stitches per inch, I think. Okay, so I'm about to get started. I'm going to put this needle down and take this pin out. And then I'm going to be watching, making sure everything is here. And then I have kind of, this is this line here that you can see, this dark line. That's where the original top stitching was. And then this little indentation is where that white line is. So I'm hoping to stay just on that other side. And notice that here, this is the actual pant. I'm going to make sure that that comes and meets the edge of my hem piece. And I apologize if my fingers get in the way. So I'm not going to backstitch. I'm just going to stitch over my original stitching when I come back here. And see my needle coming just above this little indentation. And I'm going to try to keep an eye on that. when you stop to readjust everything, make sure that your needle is down. So it may look like some of the cutting wasn't exactly right, but that's okay because we really are watching this stitch line and the indentation of that hem rolled part. Now here, I just want to make sure that I'm hopefully getting these matched up again, right on top of each other. We'll check it out after we sew. Looks like I probably could have cut a little bit wider amount, but that's going to be all encased. So I'm coming back here to the original stitch line. I'm going to just trim this thread off here, the original start line, and then come back into that stitch. And then I'm just going to go back over that heavy part. And I'm not going to back stitch. I'm just going to lift the needle up and go ahead and take it out. So let's see how well I did. No promises here. So that looks pretty good. So the stitch line of the original stitching goes straight across. Let's look at this other, the out seam. I was a little worried about this one. And that looks like I did pretty well as well. And now you can get a close-up view of what I was talking about with that wider line. So this is where I'm going to put my stitching, my top stitching, and we're just going to actually fold this right over that, like that. And then the stitching will go right on that line. If we look, I still have that white line going all the way around. Okay, for the most part. So I'm actually going to go back to the table and I'm going to pull the iron out and I'm going to get this pressed. Okay, so I'm back here at the table. I've got the ironing board. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly press that seam that I sewed. Be careful that you don't press the fold over here at the hem because you need that fold, that nice fold of where all of the detail is. So just press that seam. And then one note here, I did realize that, I wasn't as careful cutting as I thought. So this could affect your length, although probably not a whole lot because my seam here is pretty skinny. Whereas over here on this side, it's actually that 3/16 over here. So I'll just need to take care the next time when I'm actually cutting, pay more attention. But I mean, I'm not really that worried about it. So I don't, they won't be off that much. So I'm just going to press that seam. That's just a personal thing. I don't worry about it too much. But of course, if these were for a client, I would have taken a lot more care, and I probably should be taking as much care with my own garments as I would for a client's. Also, while I'm getting this pressed, sorry about the ironing board. I know it's kind of busy. I haven't recovered it. I need to cover it in a solid color so you can see better. But I just pressed that, and now what I'm going to do is here on this seam, I don't need the ironing board right now, so I'll take that off. So here, I'm keeping my pants inside out. I can pull this, and I want to actually fold that seam allowance toward the hem piece. And then I'm going to fold the wrong side of the hem piece over on top of that. So it should fold pretty easy on that fold line already, right? But we want to make sure that we're actually getting this seam allowance well on that seam. Or well toward, it's folded toward the inside of that hem piece. and then we're going to fold this over. Now I'm doing this on the inside, but on the outside is where we're going to be sewing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin on the outside. I know this will be hard to see. So again, here's that really thick part. So I'm going to make sure that's folded in. Now some people like to take a hammer and hammer these down, but when you do that, you're actually kind of destroying the fibers a little bit more. If you can, once you get this all pinned, if you can, put some steam there on this really thick part. If you put steam on it and then glove your hands so that you don't get hurt, and then just kind of press it, that steam in here will create the moisture, and it will have an easier time of the needle going through because the fibers will be a little bit wet, and they'll spread a little bit easier. So I'm just going to go around and fold this into that hem piece, and I'm going to pin right on that stitch line, that darker line here. So I'm just kind of making sure that that seam is kind of flush while I'm folding it over, and I should be covering that original stitch line. So this was the part where the hem was a little bit narrow. You can also cut more off and then trim it if you'd like after you've sewn that seam on. Doing it this way where you're encasing this seam actually keeps that seam from fraying when they're washed, if you wash your jeans. Now this is a pair of what they call premium denim. I'm not going to give the brand away, but a lot of premium denims on the inside tell you not to wash them, or they'll tell you to dry clean them. And just a little note, when you do take them to the dry cleaners, you probably need to specify that they need to be dry cleaned instead of washed, because sometimes they will just throw them in the wash. Okay, so everything is pinned. And I normally, personally, I don't pin, but I wanted you to see what that looked like. So I'm going to start here and go over this part. Now some people, if you're worried about this thickness, you can start here on the out seam, because that's an easier thickness to go over if you're really good about stitching right over your original stitching. But I'm going to start here just on the opposite side of this. But I have an industrial machine again, so it should go right over this. But I'm pressing down here just to kind of smash everything. You can also hand crank over this area. The thing that you do want to make sure is I'm putting this pin going all the way across, is you want to make sure that your stitches actually get on the other side. Sometimes this will slip down and your stitches won't catch that. So just beware of that. So I'm going to go back over to the machine and we're going to get these stitches, get this stitched on. And I think I've decided I'm going to use this wheat color. Okay, so I'm back at the machine here, and again, right here where this dark line is, that's where I'm going to be stitching. Now I'm going to leave my stitch length at the 3 that I was using before, and hopefully it will match the length. But if you want to, you can actually look really closely and find out where those holes were, and you can actually match your stitch length if that's something that you're concerned about. I don't get really too worried about it, although sometimes I will stitch on a piece of fabric like muslin, and then I will match it back to the stitch length on the pant before I even start this process. So here I'm starting just before the really thick part here, and I may have a hard time, but let me take this needle out, and I'm going to go slow, and I'm going to hold on here to the back, kind of help this through the machine. And sometimes here on this, going this way, my foot might hook up on that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift the presser foot up. I'm going to put that needle down, and I'm going to push it by hand, and see it's pushing away. So I'm going to have to just push this underneath and get it going. And you see it's pushing the fabric, and what it may do is misalign here. So I'm going to lift the presser foot up again and kind of push this fabric back again. And then we'll go. Push the needle all the way down. There we go. That went over okay. We'll see what the underside looks like after I get this finished. Now this is where, if you have the hump jumper, you would have put it behind before you went over to even out the back of the foot. So I'm going to take these other pins out. I'm going to continue going, making sure underneath that everything is still enclosed. And I'm just following this dark line. Needle down. I'm going to stop here. This is the out seam, not another thickness. Take that pin out and I push that. Not as bad as the inseam, but I like to hold it here on both sides. And I know my machine pretty well, so I know how fast it will go. I'm going to lift this up because I think it's pushing that seam. I should have lifted it up a little sooner. All right. So for those of you who have industrial machines, you just have to get used to how fast they go and when your foot pedal, at what point in your foot pedal the machine actually goes when you actually push the foot pedal down. Sometimes it takes off on me. And I don't have a finger guard here. I probably should. And we're coming back here to the original. And I may go over this again. I don't know. We'll see how I feel about it, but I'm really going right over those stitches. So now it's already pretty well flat. I'm going to lift this up. Now this part, well, kind of sped up a little there. Let me put the needle down. So I didn't really mention this when I did it. I mentioned after it. So this is the part where your presser foot is going up the mountain, shall we say. And if you have one of those hump jumpers and you put it back here, under here, and then put your presser foot down so the presser foot stays level so it doesn't actually push that. Those of you who have walking feet also, that's what that helps with. Now some of you have a machine with a wider foot and has a knob back here that you can push in with a spring on it. You push in and that releases the back of this to keep it in that position. So, but I don't have that and I just kind of did this manually, but I'm going to go over this again. Go over that, and I think I pushed that seam, so it's probably not exactly lining up anymore. Let's have a look real quick here. It did catch that part right here, but if you look, well, the seam itself and the stitching is still lined up, but you can see where it kind of pushed that fabric. You might be able to manipulate that going back the other way. I'm not too concerned about that. And then let's see this other one here. So that's stayed here pretty well aligned. But as you can see, I missed a couple of stitches right here. It didn't quite get up there. I'm probably not going to worry about that. If this were for a client, the sad part about this is I probably would rip everything from here all the way around to here. So that I just have the double stitching here at the inseam, and I'd redo all of this. But I don't think this is really going to pull out, but I would never let this go out the door to a client like that. So I would actually rip the whole thing out and do it again. So, but because it's me, and I don't think it will come out, and I probably won't be washing these all the time. So I only wash my jeans maybe once a month. So let's go back over to the table. Okay, so we're back at the table, and I'm just going to give this a quick press while it's inside out. So one note, a denim should be okay, but if there's any kind of special finish on the pant, or if you're working on maybe a twill that is lighter weight or has a sand wash on it, you probably want to use a press cloth so that you don't destroy that finish or that it doesn't come off on your iron. So these are just regular denim. I just want to get that pressed this way. And then I will turn it right side out. Okay, this is the front. This here is a little thick. I like to press them flat, like this. Get some good steam in there, kind of flatten everything. And I feel like if I'm looking at this, you probably can't see it on camera, but the stitches are kind of small, although they probably match. And this thread is definitely lighter than the original thread, but I probably could have done a slightly longer stitch. So there you have it. That's the way I do my original hems. It almost looks exactly like it did before with that white line just above the stitch line. And there are, of course, other ways to do it. I'm sure other people have other tutorials, but this is the way that I do it. Now, you can see here a couple things. It does look like it's stretched a little bit. So in that case, I'm not going to do it to the other one because then I would have two that looked not the same, two pant legs that didn't look the same. But next time I may actually just taper this just a little bit, maybe a total of 1/4 inch, so make an 1/8 of an inch seam. That way I wouldn't have it stretched out that way. But these are just for myself. I needed some new jeans and I have others coming on the way, but I don't think I'm going to take the time to do this. But if you want to do the original hem on your pants, this is the way that I do it. And now I'm going to go finish this other side off camera. So if you like this video, please hit the subscribe button. I'm going to have other tutorials like this coming out soon, so also hit the notifications. And again, thank you for watching and be well.